Hey all, here at OS Reviews. In this video, we're taking a look at the ACEMAGIC Kron Mini K1. This is a mini PC running on a full version of Windows 11, and the name actually sounds rather familiar because the chassis of this K1 is a design that we have seen already for a couple of generations. Many of these manufacturers tend to use more or less this type of look as this cube form factor. It's clean, don't get me wrong, but on the surface might not seem like anything too radically exciting. For instance, I think Chewy, B-Link have all referenced a similar chassis in the past. And that's even more so true for this brand, ACEMAGIC, because we have seen some of their other mini PCs in the past which have had more of a obvious gamer-inspired look, like the AD08 and AX15 having a interesting kind of trapezoid profile with a knob on the top that you can use to dial through settings in terms of performance, including the highest CPU and GPU versus more power efficient, in addition to some of these mecha-inspired accents into the chassis that made it just a little bit more interesting. In comparison, the K1 is much more tame. However, if you thought the previous design was just a little bit too loud and in your face, then maybe you prefer the more subtle, minimalistic look of the K1, and similarly, it's going to be more compact as well, so it's going to take up even less space on a desk, more non-assuming. Furthermore, by focusing on the essentials, I guess one other plus is this one is a little bit more cost-effective. It's still not the cheapest mini PC on the market, however, that's also because it's packing slightly higher-end components inside. For example, this one, as configured, includes 32 gigabytes of RAM, 1 TB SSD, and also powered by an AMD Ryzen 7 5700U. And this processor clocks up to 4.3 GHz on the turbo speed, so it's definitely going to be faster, feeling more performant versus many of the Intel Celeron N100 computers, for example, which are roughly $200. So you're spending a bit more, getting more RAM, getting more performance from the CPU and the GPU side as well. So yeah, it's more like a mid-ranger if you felt that the previous entry-level models weren't enough, you're trying to do a little bit more of maybe Photoshop, video editing work casually, then something like this is going to just fare better. ACEMAGIC also touts consistent cooling using that fan, so it will ensure that the thermals don't overheat as you're running programs for longer durations. And there's also two M.2 SSD slots on here if you want to further augment the, again, built-in storage even more. And funny enough, as part of their listing, they've also included some sample games that you can try playing back locally on a machine like this. For example, League of Legends, as you can see here, Civilizations, Apex Legends, CSGO, Hades as some titles, and also a sample average frame rate down below here as well. So it's again going to be a little bit more speedy if you are doing some casual gaming as well. Taking a closer look at the design here next, it's crafted out of just a polycarbonate or plastic shell. So again, the chassis is very non-assuming for the power that it packs inside. We have two USB 3.0 ports, Type A, also a 3.5mm headphone jack, Type C port for linking to monitors, charging, data transfer, and also power key, ventilation there for the fan, and then on the back we have 4 more full-size USB Type A ports, in addition to an Ethernet port as an alternative to Wi-Fi. But interestingly enough, it looks like for faster setup, as Windows 11 initializes, they recommend you using Wi-Fi first. And there's also a display port here as well, in addition to a full-sized HDMI port, Kingston lock, and barrel connection here for power. Back here just houses some soft touch rubber to prevent it from sliding around on a surface, some optional mounting brackets if you want to hide this behind a monitor or TV and let it disappear from view, plus the cooling fans. As for what else is included in the packaging, it's a rather generic looking box, but underneath here we do have just a quick user guide housing the optional screws for mounting, as well as the 2 ends of the power supply. Because this one is using that Ryzen 7 chip, it does have a larger power brick, as you can tell here, kind of like conventional computers of the past. But at least it provides enough power for it to run at the maximum load. And also you get the optional, again, mounting VESTA adapter, along with a bundled HDMI cable is included as well. Moving into the Windows 11 desktop experience, we can see that out of the 1 TB SSD, roughly 896 gigabytes are free after the operating system and updates have been installed. It is recommended to bypass the Wi-Fi setup if you want to more quickly get into this Windows desktop for the first time. Otherwise, if you type in your Wi-Fi info or you connect to Ethernet, it might take actually an hour or two for Windows updates to install before you're able to jump into this environment. So if you're in a bit of a hurry, a pro tip is just to bypass that, and then when you get into Windows, then connect to Wi-Fi. Thankfully though, once updates are installed, the SSD and processor here are definitely quite speedy and responsive. So a cold boot into Windows only takes about 5 seconds on this machine, so quite quick. And jumping into the other system properties, we can verify the processor, Ryzen 7 5700U, 32GB of RAM, and it is a fully licensed version of Windows 11 Pro. And maybe it's something I've overlooked previously, but I think it's my first time actually seeing a Q&A section under the About System part of Windows. It says, how does having 16GB or more RAM impact my PC's performance? And it says, having 16 or more is excellent for power users. Kind of interesting they added some of those general computing facts there. And in terms of, again, general navigation around the UI, I can indeed confirm that it is a very speedy and responsive experience. And you can see that just running a couple of programs here, it's not even taxing the processor at all, even though we have roughly a dozen tabs open in the browser already, only using about 3% of the CPU. Also, when you're not pressing it super hard, for example, doing things like video editing or gaming, the mini PC can also go into more quiet or nearly silent mode. So if we put it close to the microphone here, so it's not going to be that distracting and only turns on when necessary, sustaining the system performance. Otherwise, all of the transition effects built into Windows 11 Desktop all seem to be running quite smoothly. The computer rarely misses a beat when it comes to just general navigation, as you can tell here, remaining quite speedy. And so compared to some of the entry-level mini PCs, which have already improved compared to previous generations, this feels even more responsive and snappy. So jumping into the browser here next, let's try loading up some web pages like maybe The Verge. And as you can tell here, overall browsing speeds, it's as expected, very fast and reliable, almost instantaneous whenever a tab here is clicked on, since we do have plenty of power inside of here underneath the hood. And that is coupled with pretty excellent Wi-Fi reception as well, getting almost full bars, despite the router being in a different room, so staying connected is generally not going to be an issue. And thanks to the 32GB of RAM, you're able to open up more than 24 tabs in Edge or Chrome, and everything is still mostly retained in the system's memory. I can jump back and forth between these complex pages from The Verge that has plenty of ads, video elements, CNET as well, plenty of scrolling components which are more taxing on resources, but everything still feels very fast when it comes to navigation and keeping all of these tabs retained, so it doesn't really need to reload either. And that's also mirrored in the synthetic benchmark scores. Sometimes there is a disconnect with the real-world performance, but on here, you can definitely tell we have plenty of horsepower to play with. On Passmark, reaching over 15,600 on multi-score, and actually putting it a little bit ahead of something like an Apple M1, roughly on par with an Apple M2 silicon. In fact, versus the aforementioned M1, it even comes out around 1,000 points ahead. So even though it isn't the newest processor from AMD anymore, it still retains a pretty solid level of performance. Just for reference, the latest entry-level generation of Intel Celeron chips that we recently saw in one of our $200 mini PCs, which was the N100, actually clocks in around 5,000 on Passmark. So it's roughly 1/3 the performance of this Ryzen 7 5700U. And yeah, synthetic benchmarks are one thing, but in real-world performance, it still translates to everything being very snappy. You rarely have to wait for any elements to load. Everything just feels a little bit more responsive and smooth overall. Moving into a video streaming demo, we can jump into a YouTube clip here, and let's actually crank up the resolution up to 4K, and also pull up stats for nerds, and full screen this. And this is a pretty long, over 11-hour video, so it's expected to take maybe a beat to initially load, as we can see here. But once it actually begins to play, it still remains very smooth to the human eye, considering we are in 4K. We can jump ahead into some other parts, maybe taking just a split second there, and then it just continues to play back quite smoothly. So again, good Wi-Fi reception quality, and also if you're using this as a media streamer, connecting to a TV for media entertainment, it's going to do just fine, whether it's YouTube, Netflix, Hulu, or local files as well, even up to the 4K Ultra HD resolution. In fact, let's click on one other video here and see how it loads back, continuing to remain quite responsive in terms of the video playback overall. Also, it's not surprising that Office tasks, including documents from Excel, PowerPoint, Word, are all going to open up really without any problems. Even larger and longer documents with pivot tables, formulas, as well as having maybe dozens of pages can still load back in a relatively smooth and responsive way. Again, thanks to the plentiful RAM and processor here. These casual tasks, in fact, can be performed decently these days, even on less performant computers. So it's no surprise that it runs even better on something like this. No issues here at all, whether it's for school or office-related work. And something we've mentioned previously is even entry-level mini PCs in the $200 range can already play retro emulation style games quite smoothly in this day and age, whether it's original Xbox or DS titles just fine. Now, if you're looking at slightly newer made-for-PC titles that are more demanding, it can even be played on slightly lower graphic settings. For example, we saw Grand Theft Auto there play back just fine, and this is Fortnite, and equally, it's actually playing back at a pretty smooth, almost 60 FPS, as you can tell there. So if you're looking to do a little bit of gaming here and there, this is a machine that definitely can handle this better compared to many of the Celeron-based mini PCs. Again, since we have essentially 3 times the performance underneath the hood. Here's also PUBG as a quick demo, again in lower graphic settings, but under these modes it still remains pretty smooth just for some casual gaming. Now, if we are getting into AAA territory like Cyberpunk, as you can tell here, you will still see some more drop frames here and there, actually averaging around 22 frames per second. So it's not going to be quite as buttery smooth, but this is a very demanding title, pretty much the maximum when it comes to resources that you can find in a PC game, and it's still playable locally on the machine, which is already quite impressive. Here's also Call of Duty as another example as well. So really not bad, and obviously if you want to play these AAA style games with even higher graphic settings and even faster responsiveness, you can also consider cloud gaming options like Microsoft's xCloud as well as Amazon's Luna, taking advantage of even more powerful hardware over cloud servers. And then again, retro emulation, whether it's Nintendo systems, PlayStation 1, PSP, GameCube titles can all play back really without any problems at all on a machine like this. So even less resource intensive retro emulation games, it's a perfectly serviceable experience. Now in terms of applications, as echoed before, because of this full x86 version of Windows desktop operating system, you can find millions of legacy apps, drivers for different peripherals that you're plugging in. App compatibility is not going to be a problem here. It's quite versatile. Everything here can be downloaded, including social media tools, entertainment. It all runs just smoothly without any problems, as long as you have enough storage, which again at nearly 1 TB is quite plentiful by default as well. Now in terms of the built-in applications, it seems like in this day and age there really isn't a free, fully licensed version of Microsoft Office that comes bundled like we once saw maybe in the early 2000s and 2010s anymore. But on this, during the setup process, I did see an offer for a 1-month trial of the Microsoft 365, which gives you 1 TB of cloud storage, as well as access to the full Microsoft Office suite locally on your machine. So that opportunity is there, but it's again more of a limited time duration. That being said, you can always leverage the cloud versions of those Office tools just by using the browser similar to Google Docs, which continues to be free. But yeah, a fully licensed version of the offline Office suite isn't really bundled with the mini PCs here anymore. It's not really unique to only this model, but something I just wanted to briefly flag. And when it comes to creative work, whether it's doing some photo editing or video stitching, it's still going to be a perfectly sufficient experience. Again, that's not too surprising because plenty of people edit videos on M1 or M2 MacBooks, which continues to be relatively high-end, flagship-grade laptops. And so we get a similar level of performance here. Even if you're handling some 4K files, rendering or exporting those files still remains a overall responsive enough experience. In my testing, I tried exporting a 1-minute long 4K file, and it only took around 1 minute and 20 seconds give and take, which is really not bad because that's usually the duration it takes to export a full HD or 1080p video file in my personal experience using more entry-level mini PCs running on Celeron chips. So you do see a significant bump there in terms of speed. Everything just feels a little bit more snappy, especially if you have more complex projects with tons of layers as well as elements. It's just going to be a bit more smooth on here. Alternatively, again, if you have more apps running in the background, thanks to the 32 gigabytes of RAM, it's going to hold them open, juggling a little bit better when it comes to multitasking. So yeah, general performance and smoothness has actually been quite good. Again, most UI elements load almost instantly once you click on them, thanks to the processor and RAM combination here underneath the hood. So that is more or less it as far as our hands-on review. So as aforementioned, even though it doesn't have the most exciting exterior design, the shell is mostly recycled, but they've kept the value intact by using a higher-end processor and RAM combination compared to many of the entry-level mini PCs. Yes, it's roughly $100 more, but I would argue that you are getting your money's worth because the performance gets you roughly 3 times faster, which is still a noticeable difference when it comes to navigating around, feeling even smoother, hardly ever missing a beat. For more seamless multitasking multitasking. You can definitely play back more games on here locally, including PC-specific newer modern titles. In addition to doing some more creative work like video editing, it's still possible on a machine like this. As well as installing more programs and media files, this might be an interesting option to consider in more of that mid-range category. So you can learn more details if interested in the links down below. For now, it's been our video. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. That has been the ACEMAGIC Ryzen 7 powered N1 Mini PC.